Have you ever felt like you're all alone? Like God has pulled you away from everything and everyone you once knew? This isolation can feel painful, confusing, even unbearable at times. But what if I told you that this is precisely the moment when God is preparing you for something greater? What if this isolation isn't punishment, but positioning? God has a pattern of separating His chosen ones before their breakthrough, setting them apart before their blessing. In moments of isolation, He's not just testing you, He's shaping you. Stay with me in this message, because what feels like loneliness may just be God's divine strategy to lead you into your destiny. Don't miss out on understanding why God isolates before He blesses. Isolation is one of the most misunderstood phases in a believer's walk with God. Many see it as punishment, as though God has abandoned them. They ask, why, Lord, have you taken me away from everything I knew, from people I love, from opportunities I once had? But what we often fail to recognize is that isolation is part of the divine process. It's a deliberate act of love, where God pulls you away from distractions, from noise, from influences that might hinder the work He's doing in your life. God isolates to recalibrate, to realign, to reintroduce you to His purpose. He does it to fine-tune you for the next level. Look at the lives of some of the most significant figures in the Bible, and you will see that God often uses isolation as a tool to prepare His servants for their greatest callings. Think of Moses. Before he led the Israelites out of Egypt, he spent 40 years in the desert isolated, away from the grandeur of Pharaoh's court. It was in that place of seclusion that God molded him into the leader he was destined to be. In the desert, Moses encountered the burning bush, received divine instruction, and developed the character necessary to handle the monumental task ahead. The desert wasn't a punishment, it was a classroom. It was God's preparation ground for the blessing of leading a nation. The same can be said for David. Anointed as king at a young age, he didn't ascend to the throne immediately. Instead, he found himself isolated, running from Saul, hiding in caves, separated from his family and his homeland. It was in these lonely places that David developed the heart of a king. His isolation wasn't abandonment, it was alignment. God was setting him apart, removing the noise, the distractions, and the influences that could corrupt the purity of his calling. David's caves of isolation were God's way of protecting him from premature elevation. If David had taken the throne too soon, without the refinement that comes from isolation, he may have crumbled under the weight of his calling. God's ways are higher than ours, and His timing is perfect. When God isolates you, it's because He's positioning you for something that requires you to be stripped of every dependence on the world. He needs you to rely solely on Him, to learn the depths of His voice, to recognize His guidance without interference. In isolation, God is building spiritual muscle, endurance, and patience. He is testing your faith, but more importantly, He is building your trust in Him. You see, blessings are not just about receiving what we ask for, they are about being ready to handle what God is about to give. If you're not ready, the very blessing you seek can become a burden. God isolates you to prepare you to carry the weight of His promise. Consider Joseph. Before he became the second most powerful man in Egypt, he experienced betrayal by his brothers and was sold into slavery. Then, just when things seemed to be looking up, he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. Joseph was isolated from his family, from his culture, from his freedom. But in that place of isolation, God was working behind the scenes. Every setback was a setup for a divine comeback. In prison, God refined Joseph's character, taught him humility, and prepared him for a position of leadership he never could have imagined. The prison was not the end of Joseph's story, it was the gateway to his promotion. Isolation is often where God hides His greatest treasures. When He pulls you away from everything familiar, it's because He wants to speak to you in ways you've never heard before. He wants to show you things that can only be revealed in the stillness. The noise of life can drown out the whisper of God's voice, but in isolation you have no choice but to lean in, to listen closely, to seek Him with all your heart. And when you do, God reveals things that you never would have seen if you had stayed in the crowd. He uncovers the depths of your purpose, the magnitude of your calling, and the strength that lies within you. Jesus himself modeled this. Before he began his public ministry, he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. For 40 days he was isolated, fasting, praying, and being tested. The wilderness wasn't a mistake, it was a place of preparation. It was in the isolation of the wilderness that Jesus defeated the temptations of the enemy and emerged in the power of the Spirit. It was after the wilderness that he began his mighty works, preaching, healing, and delivering the oppressed. If the Son of God needed a season of isolation before stepping into his purpose, how much more do we? God isolates because he knows what's ahead. He sees the battles you'll face, the opposition you'll encounter, and he wants to ensure that you are fortified, grounded, and unwavering. He knows that the blessings he has prepared for you come with responsibilities, challenges, and even new levels of spiritual warfare. Isolation is where God equips you with the armor you'll need for the journey ahead. It's where he strengthens your faith so that when you step into your blessing, you won't be swayed by the winds of adversity. Many times people around us don't understand the weight of the calling on our lives. They may even be well-meaning, but their voices can distract us from God's voice. They can impose their opinions, their fears, their doubts, and without realizing it, they can pull us away from the path God has us on. This is why God often isolates you before blessing you. He removes the external influences, not because they are bad, but because he needs your focus to be solely on him. He needs your attention undivided, your heart fully surrendered, and your spirit in tune with his. In isolation, God also teaches you how to be content with his presence alone. Too often we rely on people for validation, for approval, for affirmation. But in the place of isolation, God strips away those dependencies. He teaches you that his approval is all you need. He shows you that his presence is sufficient, that his grace is enough. You learn to walk in the assurance that you are fully loved, fully known, and fully accepted by God, even if no one else sees or understands. Isolation, then, is not a curse, it's a blessing in disguise. It's a divine cocoon where God transforms you from who you were into who he's calling you to be. Just as a butterfly must endure the solitude of the chrysalis before it can spread its wings, you must endure the season of isolation before you can step into the fullness of your blessing. The process may be painful, it may be lonely, but it is purposeful. God doesn't waste time and he doesn't waste experiences. Every moment of isolation is part of his plan to bless you, to prepare you, and to launch you into your destiny. In the midst of isolation, it's easy to feel forgotten. But remember this, God never forgets his promises. Just because you don't see the blessing yet doesn't mean it's not on its way. Just because you feel isolated doesn't mean you've been abandoned. In fact, it's the opposite. God is closer than ever in the season of isolation. He is speaking, guiding, and preparing the blessing that will not only impact your life, but the lives of those around you. God isolates you because he's not just thinking about you, he's thinking about the ripple effect your life will have when you step into your calling. The blessing that follows isolation is always greater than what you could have imagined. God does not isolate to punish, he isolates to purify. He isolates to prepare. He isolates to position you for blessings that are bigger than you can comprehend. So if you find yourself in a season of isolation, don't despair. Don't give up. Trust that God is at work in the unseen places, refining you, molding you, and getting ready to release a blessing that will not only change your life, but glorify him in ways you never thought possible. When God isolates you, it's often because he's preparing you for something that will require greater responsibility, greater strength, and greater discernment. You see, isolation is not about punishment, it's about preparation. The weight of the blessing that God is about to place in your life will require a new level of faith, a new level of maturity, and a new level of trust in him. God is working behind the scenes, orchestrating everything according to his divine plan. And part of that plan is to ensure that when the blessing comes, you are fully equipped to handle it. Think about the life of Abraham. Before he became the father of nations, God isolated him. He called Abraham to leave his home, his country, and his family and to go to a land that he would show him. Abraham didn't even know where he was going. He just had to trust God. Imagine the isolation he must have felt, leaving behind everything that was familiar to him, stepping into the unknown with nothing but a promise from God. Yet, it was in that place of isolation that God began to reveal the magnitude of his plans for Abraham. It was in that place of separation that Abraham's faith was tested and strengthened. And isn't it interesting that the very first thing God did with Abraham was to isolate him from his environment? God knew that in order for Abraham to step into the fullness of his calling, he needed to be separated from the influences of his past, from the people who might have doubted or discouraged him. Abraham's isolation wasn't a sign of abandonment. It was a sign that God was about to do something extraordinary in his life. God was positioning Abraham for a generational blessing, but first he had to pull him away from everything that could potentially hold him back. This is what God does with us. He isolates us to protect us from influences that might hinder our growth, from relationships that might distract us from his voice, and from environments that are not conducive to the calling he has placed on our lives. In the place of isolation, God strips away everything that is not aligned with his purpose for you. He removes the noise, the distractions, and the people who may not be able to go with you into the next season. Isolation is not a punishment, it's a divine pruning process. Jesus spoke about this in John 15, where he says, "I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful." John 15, 1-2. The pruning process can feel like isolation, like loss, but it's actually God's way of preparing you to bear more fruit. He is cutting away the dead branches, the things in your life that are no longer serving you or your purpose. And sometimes that means isolating you from people, places, or things that are not aligned with the blessing he is about to bring. In the same way that a gardener prunes a tree to increase its fruitfulness, God isolates you to increase your capacity to carry the blessing. He wants to ensure that when the blessing comes, you are rooted deeply enough in him to sustain it. You see, it's not just about receiving the blessing, it's about maintaining it, stewarding it, and allowing it to grow. And for that, you need to be deeply rooted in God. Isolation is where those roots grow. Look at the example of Elijah. After his great victory on Mount Carmel, where he called down fire from heaven and defeated the prophets of Baal, Elijah found himself in a place of deep isolation. Jezebel, the queen, threatened to kill him, and Elijah fled into the wilderness. He was physically and emotionally isolated, feeling like he was the only one left who was faithful to God. But it was in that place of isolation that God met him in a profound way. In 1 Kings 19, we read that God didn't speak to Elijah in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in a still small voice. It was in the quietness of isolation that Elijah heard the voice of God most clearly. Sometimes God has to isolate you so that you can hear his voice without distraction. In the busyness of life, in the noise of the world, it's easy to miss what God is saying. But in the stillness of isolation, when everything else is stripped away, you are in a position to hear him like never before. God's voice becomes clearer, his direction becomes more precise, and his purpose for your life becomes more evident. Elijah's isolation wasn't a punishment, it was an opportunity for him to reconnect with God on a deeper level, to be refreshed and renewed for the next phase of his ministry. This is what happens in the place of isolation. God is not punishing you, he is preparing you. He is refining you, shaping you, and positioning you for the blessing that is to come. And often that blessing is not just for you, it's for the people around you, for the generations to come. God isolated Joseph not just to bless him, but to save an entire nation. God isolated Moses not just for his own benefit, but to deliver the Israelites from slavery. God isolates his chosen ones because he knows that their blessing will have a far-reaching impact, and he wants them to be fully prepared for the weight of that responsibility. But in the midst of isolation, it's easy to feel forgotten, overlooked, or even abandoned. You may wonder why God has pulled you away from everything familiar, why you no longer feel the same connections with people, why doors that were once open are now closed. You may question if you've done something wrong, if God is punishing you for a past mistake. But let me assure you, God's isolation is never about punishment, it's about preparation. The enemy will try to use isolation to make you feel abandoned, to make you question God's love and His plans for your life. But you must remember that God is always with you, even in the isolation. In fact, it's often in those moments of solitude that God's presence is most tangible. He is closer than ever, whispering to your heart, strengthening your spirit, and preparing you for the next step. The enemy wants you to believe that isolation is a sign of God's absence, but in reality, it's a sign of His intimate involvement in your life. God isolates you because He has a specific purpose for your life, a purpose that requires you to be set apart. You cannot be like everyone else if you are called to something greater. You cannot live like the world if you are called to influence the world for Christ. This is why God isolates you. He is setting you apart for something that is uniquely designed for you. He is preparing you for a blessing that is tailor-made for your life, for your calling, for your destiny. Remember the story of Esther. She was isolated in the king's palace, separated from her people, from her culture, from her family. But that isolation was part of God's plan. Esther's isolation positioned her to save her people from destruction. Had she not been isolated, had she not been set apart in the king's palace, she would not have been in a position to intervene on behalf of her people. Esther's isolation wasn't about her, it was about the greater purpose that God had for her life. In the same way, your isolation is not just about you. God is preparing you to be a vessel of His blessing, to be an instrument of His purpose. He is isolating you because He wants to use you in a way that will bring glory to His name and impact the lives of those around you. But first, He needs to remove the distractions, the noise, and the influences that might hinder that process. The Apostle Paul understood this well. After his dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, Paul didn't immediately begin his ministry. Instead, he spent time in isolation, away from the apostles, away from the crowds. In Galatians 1:15-17, Paul writes, "But when God, who set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by His grace, was pleased to reveal His Son in me, so that I might preach Him among the Gentiles, my immediate response was not to consult any human being. I did not go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was, but I went into Arabia. Later I returned to Damascus." Paul's time in Arabia was a time of isolation, a time of preparation, where God revealed His purpose to Paul and equipped him for the ministry ahead. Isolation is not a place of inactivity, it's a place of divine preparation. It's where God speaks to you, where He strengthens you, where He equips you for the next phase of your journey. And when the time is right, He will bring you out of that isolation and into the fullness of your blessing. But you cannot skip the process. You cannot rush the preparation. God's timing is perfect, and He knows exactly when you are ready to step into the blessing. God isolates you because He loves you too much to let you step into something you're not ready for. He isolates you because He sees the potential within you, the greatness that is yet to be revealed. And He isolates you because He knows that the blessing He is about to release in your life requires you to be fully prepared, fully equipped, and fully surrendered to Him. So if you find yourself in a season of isolation, don't despair. God is at work in your life, even when you can't see it. He is preparing you for something greater, something beyond your imagination. Trust the process. Trust that God's isolation is not a sign of abandonment, but a sign of His divine preparation. He is getting ready to bless you in ways you never thought possible. And when that blessing comes, you will look back on this season of isolation and see that it was all part of God's perfect plan. In the process of isolation, God is refining your character. He is building in you the qualities that will sustain the blessing He is preparing to give you. Without this refining, you would not be able to carry the weight of the blessing He has in store for you. God is more concerned with your development than with your comfort. He is far more interested in who you are becoming than in the temporal ease of the moment. Isolation is God's way of doing deep internal work that no one else can see. It's in the hidden places, in the quiet, that God does his greatest work. Look at the life of David. Before he became king, he spent years in isolation. As a shepherd boy, he was alone in the fields, tending sheep with no audience, no applause, and no recognition. But it was in that place of isolation that God was preparing him for the throne. It was in those lonely fields that David learned to depend on God, to hear his voice, and to develop the heart of a king. He didn't know it at the time, but his isolation was part of God's training ground for leadership. In the fields, he learned courage by defending the sheep from lions and bears. He learned humility by serving in obscurity. He learned worship by pouring out his heart to God in solitude. David's time in the fields wasn't wasted, it was essential to his development. Had he not spent those years in isolation, he would not have been ready to face Goliath. He would not have had the faith to stand before a giant and declare that the battle belonged to the Lord. His time of isolation prepared him for the moment of public victory. And after that victory, God didn't immediately place David on the throne. Instead, David found himself once again in a place of isolation, hiding in caves, running from King Saul, who sought to kill him. But even in the caves, even in the wilderness, David remained faithful to God. He didn't understand why God allowed him to go through such hardship, why the promise of kingship seemed so far away, but he trusted the process. And that's what you must do in your season of isolation. You may not understand why you are being hidden, why doors are closing, or why relationships are shifting, but you must trust that God knows exactly what he is doing. He is preparing you for something far greater than you can imagine. God isolates you because he is developing the depth of your character. He is removing anything in you that could compromise the blessing he is about to release. He is dealing with pride, with insecurity, with fear, and with anything that could hinder you from walking fully in his purpose. You see, it's not enough to be gifted, you must also be grounded. It's not enough to have talent, you must also have integrity. And it's in the place of isolation that God cultivates these qualities in you. Joseph experienced a similar journey. He had a dream of greatness, a vision of leadership. But before that dream could become a reality, Joseph found himself isolated in a pit, sold into slavery, and later thrown into prison. His circumstances seemed to contradict the very promise of God. But it was in the pit, in slavery, and in prison that Joseph's character was being forged. God was using the isolation to strip away any sense of entitlement, to build in Joseph a heart of humility, and to prepare him for the responsibility of leadership. When Joseph finally rose to power in Egypt, he was not the same young man who had once shared his dreams with his brothers. The isolation had refined him. He had learned to trust God, even when the dream seemed impossible. He had learned to serve faithfully, even in the midst of unjust treatment. And when the time came for him to step into his position of authority, he was ready. The years of isolation had prepared him to not only receive the blessing, but to steward it well. In your own life, God may have given you a dream, a vision, a promise, and yet you find yourself in a season that seems to contradict that very promise. You may feel isolated like Joseph in the pit, wondering how God's plan will ever come to pass. But just as Joseph's isolation was part of his preparation, so too is yours. God is not delaying the blessing, he is ensuring that you are fully equipped to carry it when it comes. He is working in the unseen, aligning circumstances and preparing your heart. There's something profound about the way God works in isolation. He takes the time to refine the hidden parts of you, the areas that no one else sees. He addresses the wounds, the fears, the insecurities that might sabotage the blessing if left unchecked. He is building resilience in you, a strength of character that can withstand the pressure of the next level. The blessing God is preparing for you is not ordinary, it is extraordinary. And extraordinary blessings require extraordinary preparation. Consider the life of Moses. Before he became the deliverer of Israel, Moses spent 40 years in isolation in the wilderness. After fleeing from Egypt, he lived in obscurity, tending sheep in the desert. For 40 years, Moses was separated from the palace, from his people, and from the position of power he once held. But it was during those years in the wilderness that God was preparing Moses for his true calling. Moses' time in isolation was not wasted. God was teaching him patience, humility, and dependence on him. And when the time was right, God called Moses from the burning bush and sent him back to Egypt to deliver the Israelites. Moses' isolation was not a sign of rejection. It was a season of preparation for one of the greatest missions in biblical history. And when Moses finally stepped into his calling, he was ready. The years of isolation had prepared him to lead a nation out of bondage. In your own life, you may be in a wilderness season, feeling isolated, feeling like you're far from the promises of God. But let me remind you, God is not finished with you. He is preparing you for something greater. The wilderness is not the end of your story, it's the training ground for your destiny. God is using this time of isolation to teach you, to mold you, to shape you into the person He has called you to be. Think about Jesus Himself. Before His public ministry began, Jesus spent 40 days in isolation in the wilderness, fasting and praying. During this time, He was tempted by the devil, but He emerged from that experience filled with the power of the Holy Spirit, ready to fulfill His mission. Even Jesus, the Son of God, experienced isolation as part of His preparation. And if isolation was necessary for Jesus, how much more necessary is it for us? God uses isolation to strengthen your spirit, to build your faith, and to draw you closer to Him. In the wilderness, you learn to rely on God in a way that you never have before. When everything else is stripped away, when the distractions are gone, you are left with nothing but God. And it is in that place of solitude that you discover the depth of His love, the power of His presence, and the faithfulness of His promises. Isolation may feel lonely, but it is never a place of abandonment. God is with you in the wilderness. He is speaking to you, guiding you, and preparing you for the next chapter of your life. The Bible says in Deuteronomy 31:8, "The Lord Himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, even in isolation. God is right there with you, working all things for your good. And when the time is right, God will bring you out of that isolation and into the fullness of your blessing. You won't stay in the wilderness forever. Just as Jesus came out of the wilderness empowered for His ministry, just as Moses came out of the wilderness to lead a nation, and just as Joseph came out of the prison to rule over Egypt, so too will you come out of your season of isolation. But when you do, you will be different. You will be stronger. You will be wiser. You will be more grounded in your faith, more attuned to the voice of God, and more prepared to carry the weight of the blessing He has for you. God's timing is perfect. He knows exactly when to release you from isolation and when to bring you into the blessing. Trust His timing. Trust that He knows what is best for you. You may not understand why things are happening the way they are, but you can trust that God is in control. His plans for you are good and His purpose will prevail. As you wait in isolation, focus on what God is doing in you, not just what you are waiting for. Let Him do the deep work in your heart, the refining, the pruning, and the preparation that is necessary for the next season. Don't rush the process. Don't try to force the door open before it's time. Allow God to complete the work He has started in you, knowing that when the time comes, you will be ready to step into the blessing He has prepared for you. God isolates you because He loves you. He isolates you because He is protecting you from things you cannot yet see. He isolates you because He is preparing you for something greater than you could imagine. And when the time is right, He will bring you into that blessing. God's isolation, though often misunderstood, is a deep and powerful manifestation of His love. He separates you because He sees something in you that the world does not yet recognize. It's in isolation that God strips away the noise, the distractions, and the external pressures so that you can hear His voice more clearly. He is not just interested in your outward achievements, He cares deeply about your heart. The heart is where the transformation occurs, and sometimes that transformation can only happen in solitude. When God isolates you, He is not punishing you. He is not holding you back from the blessings you seek. Instead, He is creating in you a vessel that can not only receive His blessing, but can steward it well. The blessings of God are not light or trivial, they carry weight. With great blessing comes great responsibility. And if you are not ready to carry that weight, it can crush you. So God, in His infinite wisdom, isolates you to prepare you, to mold you into someone who can stand firm under the pressure that the blessing will bring. Think about the life of Elijah. Elijah was a prophet used mightily by God, yet he went through a season of isolation. After his great victory on Mount Carmel, where he called down fire from heaven and defeated the prophets of Baal, Elijah found himself running for his life, isolated in the wilderness. He sat under a tree, feeling utterly alone, exhausted and ready to give up. But in that moment of isolation, God met him. God didn't leave Elijah to despair. He sent an angel to strengthen him, to give him food and water, and to remind him that his journey was not over. Elijah's isolation was not the end of his story. In fact, it was during that time that God gave him a new assignment, a fresh anointing, and new strength to continue his mission. The isolation was a moment of divine reset, where God refocused Elijah's vision and renewed his purpose. Sometimes in our seasons of isolation, God is doing the same thing. He is resetting your heart, refocusing your purpose, and renewing your strength for what lies ahead. Isolation is a place of revelation. It's where God reveals Himself to you in ways that you may not have experienced before. When you are surrounded by people, by activity, and by the demands of life, it's easy to miss the still, small voice of God. But in isolation, when all those distractions are stripped away, you are in a position to hear God more clearly. It was in Elijah's isolation that God spoke to him. Not in the earthquake, not in the wind, not in the fire, but in a gentle whisper. And Elijah heard the voice of God because he was in a place of solitude, away from the noise. In your own life, God may be isolating you so that you can hear His gentle whisper. He may be calling you away from the distractions of the world, from the opinions of others, and even from the busyness of your own plans, so that He can speak to you in the quietness of your heart. God has things to reveal to you that you cannot hear in the crowd. He has insights, instructions, and revelations that are reserved for the quiet place. The isolation is not to harm you, but to position you to receive the divine wisdom that you will need for the next phase of your journey. There are times when the isolation feels unbearable, when the loneliness becomes overwhelming. But in those moments, you must remember that God is with you. You are never truly alone. Just as He was with Elijah in the wilderness, He is with you in your season of isolation. His presence is not limited to the church building or to gatherings of believers. He is with you in the quiet moments, in the solitude, in the places where no one else sees. Psalm 139, 7-10 reminds us, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. God's presence is with you in isolation. And it is in those moments that you come to know Him in a deeper way. When everything else is stripped away, when all you have is God, you realize that He is enough. His presence is enough. His love is enough. His grace is enough. And in that place of isolation, you learn to depend on Him like never before. You learn that He is your source, your sustainer, and your strength. Joseph's story teaches us a profound lesson about isolation. As we mentioned earlier, before he stepped into his destiny as a ruler in Egypt, he endured years of isolation and suffering. But here's the key: during those years, God was with him. The Bible repeatedly tells us the Lord was with Joseph, even when Joseph was in prison, even when he was falsely accused, even when he was forgotten by those he helped. God was with him. And it was that divine presence that sustained Joseph through his isolation. In your own life, you may feel like you are in a prison of isolation, trapped in a season that seems to have no end. But know this: God is with you. Just as he was with Joseph, he is with you. He has not forgotten you. He sees you and he is working behind the scenes to bring about your release at the perfect time. Your isolation is not a permanent condition, it is a temporary season of preparation. God is refining you just as he refined Joseph, so that when the time comes for your release, you will be ready to step into your destiny. When Joseph's time of isolation came to an end, he was promoted in a single day. He went from the prison to the palace in a moment. But that promotion was not a random occurrence, it was the culmination of years of preparation. Joseph had been faithful in his isolation. He had served with integrity, even in the prison, and when the time came, God elevated him to a position of influence and authority. The blessing was not just for Joseph, it was for the saving of many lives. God's purpose for Joseph's life was far greater than his own personal success. It was to be a channel of blessing to others. In the same way, your isolation is not just about you. God is preparing you not only for your own blessing, but to be a blessing to others. The anointing that he is developing in you during this time of solitude is not just for your benefit, it is for the benefit of those you will impact. Your story, your testimony, your experiences in isolation will become a source of encouragement and strength for others who are walking through their own seasons of struggle. God is preparing you to be a vessel of his grace, his love, and his power to those around you. Think about the example of Jesus. Before his public ministry began, he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where he fasted for 40 days and was tempted by the devil. This time of isolation was a critical part of his preparation. It was in the wilderness that Jesus overcame the enemy's temptations and emerged in the power of the Holy Spirit. His isolation was not a punishment, it was a time of spiritual strengthening. And when he came out of the wilderness, he began his ministry with a greater anointing and authority. In your own wilderness season, God is doing a similar work. He is strengthening you spiritually, equipping you to overcome the enemy's schemes and preparing you to walk in greater authority. The isolation is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of God's investment in your life. He is investing in you, pouring into you, and building you up so that when the time comes, you will be ready to step into your calling with boldness and confidence. Isaiah 40:31 reminds us, "But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Waiting on the Lord often feels like isolation. But it is in that waiting that God renews your strength. He is preparing you to soar like an eagle, to run with endurance, and to walk with steadfastness. The waiting is not wasted. It is a divine appointment for renewal and empowerment. As you go through your season of isolation, remember that God's timing is perfect. He knows exactly when to bring you out and when to release the blessing. Your job is not to rush the process, but to remain faithful in the waiting. Continue to seek him, continue to trust him, and continue to allow him to do the deep work in your heart. God is not finished with you yet. The isolation is just a part of the journey. And when the time comes, you will see the fulfillment of his promises in your life. God isolates you because he is preparing you for something far greater than you can imagine. He is positioning you for a blessing that will not only change your life, but will impact the lives of many others. The isolation is not a setback, it is a setup for your destiny. Trust the process, trust God's timing, and know that he is working all things together for your good. Just as the seed must be buried in the ground, away from the light, before it can sprout and grow into a mighty tree, so too must you go through a season of hiddenness before you can flourish. The isolation is not the end, it is the beginning of something beautiful. In the midst of isolation, it's easy to feel like God has forgotten you, like he has abandoned you to the wilderness of loneliness. But if you look closely, you will realize that God's hand has never left your life. The isolation is his strategy for developing you, and that development is far more important than the destination. You see, God's goal is not simply to get you to the blessing. His goal is to shape you into a person who can carry the weight of the blessing with integrity and wisdom. Consider how a tree grows. Before you ever see its branches stretch toward the sky, its roots must dig deep into the soil. The deeper the roots go, the taller and stronger the tree becomes. But the process of growing those roots happens in the dark, beneath the surface, where no one can see. In the same way, your season of isolation is a time when God is deepening your roots. He is taking you deeper into His presence, deeper into His word, and deeper into His love. The growth that happens during this time may not be visible to others, but it is essential for the stability and strength you will need for the future. Jesus said in John 15:1-2, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. This is the heart of God's isolation process, pruning. Pruning is not meant to harm you, but to prepare you for greater fruitfulness. It may feel like God is cutting things away from your life, stripping you down to the bare essentials, but that is because He is preparing you to bear more fruit. The isolation is not a punishment, it is a process of refinement. And just like a gardener carefully tends to each plant, God is carefully tending to you during this time. He is removing the dead weight, the distractions, the unnecessary attachments that would hinder your growth. He is shaping you into the person He created you to be, so that when the time comes, you will be able to carry the fullness of His blessing without it destroying you. Let's not forget the story of Moses. Moses spent 40 years in isolation, tending sheep in the desert before he ever led the people of Israel out of Egypt. 40 years is a long time to be hidden away from the world, especially for a man who had grown up in the royal courts of Egypt. Moses had been raised as a prince with all the privileges and power that came with it. Yet before he could step into his divine assignment, God took him into the desert. Why? Because Moses needed to be shaped. His time in isolation was not a waste, it was preparation. In the desert, Moses learned humility. He learned patience. He learned how to lead by serving. He was being trained, not in the ways of Egyptian royalty, but in the ways of the kingdom of God. And when the time was right, God called Moses out of isolation and into his destiny. But it was those 40 years in the desert that equipped Moses to lead the people of Israel through their own wilderness journey. The isolation prepared him for the assignment. And the same is true for you. The desert seasons of your life, the times when you feel hidden, forgotten, and alone, are not wasted. They are preparing you for the assignment that God has placed on your life. It may take longer than you expect. It may require more patience than you think you have. But God's timing is always perfect, and His preparation is always thorough. Isolation is a place where God detoxifies your spirit. He removes the toxins of pride, of self-reliance, of fear, and of doubt. He purifies your motives and aligns your heart with His. You see, before God can bless you publicly, He must cleanse you privately. He will not elevate you to a place of prominence if your heart is not right. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. If your heart is not pure, the blessing will not flow as it should. So God isolates you to work on your heart, to clean out the impurities, and to make sure that when the blessing comes, it will flow through you with purity and power. It's in the quiet moments of isolation that you come face to face with yourself. The distractions are gone, the noise is silenced, and you are left with nothing but your thoughts and God's presence. This can be an uncomfortable place, but it is a necessary one. In this place, God reveals the things in your heart that need to change. He shows you the areas where you need to grow, where you need to let go of pride, where you need to surrender control. It's in isolation that you are broken, not in a way that destroys you, but in a way that molds you into something greater. Jacob, for instance, wrestled with God in isolation. In Genesis 32, Jacob found himself alone on the brink of a major transition in his life. He was about to meet his brother Esau, whom he had wronged many years before. Fear and uncertainty gripped Jacob's heart, and in the middle of the night he wrestled with God. This was a moment of profound isolation. There was no one around, no distractions, no escape. It was just Jacob and God. And And in that wrestling match, Jacob was changed forever. God touched his hip, leaving him with a limp, a physical reminder of the encounter. But more importantly, God gave him a new name, Israel. The isolation led to transformation. Your own wrestling with God in isolation may not leave you with a physical limp, but it will leave you transformed. It will leave you with a deeper understanding of who God is and who you are in Him. It will strip away the things that are holding you back, the things that are keeping you from stepping into your full potential. And in the end, you will emerge from the isolation with a new name, a new identity, and a new sense of purpose. The isolation also serves as a test of your faith. When you are isolated, you have no one to lean on but God. The crutches that you once relied on are gone, and you are forced to walk by faith. This is where you learn to trust God in a deeper way. It's easy to trust God when everything is going well, when you are surrounded by support, and when the blessings are flowing. But can you trust Him when you are alone? Can you trust Him when you are isolated, when the future is uncertain, and when it seems like nothing is happening? This is the test of faith that Abraham faced. God called him to leave his homeland, his family, and everything he knew to go to a land that God would show him. Abraham didn't have a map, he didn't have all the details, and he didn't have a timeline. All he had was a promise from God and a step of faith to take. Abraham's journey was one of isolation. He was separated from the familiar, from the comfortable, and from the predictable. But in that isolation, Abraham learned to trust God. He learned that God is faithful to His promises, even when the path is uncertain. In your own life, God may be asking you to take a step of faith in the midst of isolation. He may be asking you to trust Him when the way forward is unclear, when the answers are not immediate, and when the blessing seems far off. But know this: God is faithful. He will never leave you nor forsake you. And just as He was faithful to Abraham, He will be faithful to you. Isolation is also where God builds your resilience. It's easy to be strong when everything is going well, but true strength is developed in adversity. True strength is forged in the fires of isolation, where you are tested, refined, and strengthened by God's hand. The Bible tells us in James 1:2-4, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." In isolation, your perseverance is tested. Will you keep pressing forward even when the road is long and the progress is slow? Will you continue to trust God even when it feels like nothing is happening? This is where resilience is born. And as you develop that resilience, you become mature and complete, lacking nothing. The isolation is not just about getting you through a difficult season, it's about shaping you into a person of strength, maturity, and perseverance. When David was anointed as king, he didn't immediately take the throne. Instead, he spent years in isolation, hiding in caves, running for his life, and waiting for God's promise to be fulfilled. David could have given up. He could have become bitter and discouraged in his isolation. But instead, David used that time to grow closer to God. He wrote many of the Psalms during his time of isolation, pouring out his heart to God, worshiping Him in the midst of his trials, and finding strength in God's presence. David's isolation was not wasted, it was the training ground for his kingship. In your own life, God may have given you a promise, a vision, or a dream that has not yet come to pass. And in the waiting, in the isolation, it can be tempting to give up, to lose hope, and to doubt that God's promise will ever be fulfilled. But just like David, you must use this time to draw closer to God, to deepen your relationship with Him, and to find strength in His presence. The promise is still valid, and the isolation is preparing you to step into that promise at the right time. The key to thriving in isolation is to shift your focus from what you don't have to what God is doing within you. Isolation is not a void, it is a space where God is actively working, shaping, and preparing you for what's ahead. As we conclude, Remember that your season of isolation is not a sign of abandonment, but a divine setup for your blessing. God isolates you to build you, strengthen you, and prepare you to carry the greatness He's destined for your life. Embrace the solitude, for it is in the quiet that He refines you, prunes away distractions, and equips you for your next level. Trust the process and know that your breakthrough is on the horizon. May God bless you with patience, perseverance, and faith as He prepares you for the incredible blessings to come. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. May His grace and favor surround you always.